Some of this week's contestants may receive all new editions of Wheel of Fortune featuring Vanna White and Jeopardy featuring Alex Trebek for play on the 16-bit Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Super Nintendo review here on Player One Start. And at last, we are going to wrap up the gameplay section of this review by taking a look at a bunch of different miscellaneous games that I didn't really feel fit a different category. And it can also include some games that I feel like I missed, or definitely need to be shown before the end of this review. Where I last left off, we were looking at puzzle games, and I said we would start off this video with the strategy games, so let's go ahead and dive in and take a look. Moving on to some of the simulation games on here, the first one I picked up was SimAnt, and bear with me here as I try to explain this because it is a bit more complicated than it looks. You play as an ant, and you're trying to build a colony, hence SimAnt. This game is okay, and I could have seen myself getting very much into this back in the day, but as an adult with adult problems, I could care less about ants. SimCity 2000 was another one of my most played games on the PC back when we got it in 1996. In fact, out of most of the modern ports that have been made to, I will still come back to this version and play it on the PC because it's just one of my favorites. So how does it hold up on the Super Nintendo? It actually does kind of an admirable job considering the resources that PCs had at this time versus the aging hardware on the Super Nintendo. But where this game particularly falters, in my opinion, is the lack of mouse support. I understand in the first SimCity there was no such accessory as the Super Nintendo mouse. Even if it was planned, they didn't have the ability to add it into the first game. But this game definitely suffers without it, and it is almost unplayable, at least in my opinion, without having the ability to move your cursor where you want to very quickly. SimEarth is a game where you're given an entire planet to terraform and then encourage life forms to grow, such as vegetation, animals, and even people. To keep the planet going, you are given control over the planet's atmosphere, temperatures, land masses, and then you can place different forms of life on the planet and watch them evolve. This one is very hard for me to get into these days because you definitely need some sort of guide to help you know what button means what to click, and you will definitely have a bit of a learning curve at the beginning. But once you get the hang of it, the game is kind of fun. It's not up there on the level of SimCity style of fun, but it's not as bad as something like SimAnt or SimCity 2000 for controls, but I wouldn't recommend it as essential either. Civilization is another game that I remember very fondly on the PC, though not as much as something like SimCity, or even games like Age of Empires. I will say most of my experience is based with Civilization 2, but as far as I can tell, this is a pretty faithful port of the original PC version on the Super Nintendo. But again, as with some of the SimCity titles, I'm going to say the biggest thing that holds this game back is the lack of mouse support. It is a bit tedious to go through all the menus, but if you're willing to put up with all that, it actually is pretty fun once you get into the game. Game show games on the Super Nintendo were fun back in the day to play, and I think are fun to go back to. The first one I have here is Family Feud, which I will admit is probably the most dated out of the game show games on here because all of the surveys and data are from the early 90s. So for example, on a question on what do you not want to forget to do before you go to bed, charging your cell phone is not going to be on the list. But sometimes it is fun to go back and see what the answers would have been back then. Again, this game is more fun with more players. And this is a game I stream from time to time because it's just fun to see what the answers would have been, and we all usually have a good time trying to come up with these answers. Jeopardy is another game that is fun. There's a deluxe edition, which is what I'm playing, but there's also a couple other games, the original Jeopardy and the sports edition one. This game is also fun, but the only thing I don't like is that you have to try to spell out your answers, and it can be pretty picky about your spelling. Also, the same rule applies that these questions obviously date from the early 90s, so you're not going to find questions about iPods, iPads, or even anything about the internet on here.
The answer is...
My favorite game show game that exists on here is Wheel of Fortune. Again, there are two editions, the one that just says starring Vanna White, and the deluxe edition, but I'm going to let you know the deluxe edition is probably the better one to get, because the first one does not give you enough time to enter in answers. What I mean by that is the clock is just a lot more strict on that first edition, so deluxe edition is the one to go with. And sometimes it doesn't even matter how dated the puzzles are, unless you just can't remember who that important celebrity was from 1992.
Choose a letter.
And believe it or not, one of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo growing up was Super Caesar's Palace. I'm not sure which one of us in our family would have been the one that wanted to get this game. I assume maybe it was one of my parents, because who wants to teach kids how to gamble? But I remember spending hours in this game just playing slot machines, roulette, learning what Keno is, and writing down the lengthy password so I can continue if I had any money left when I was done. I admit this is not an essential you should have in your collection, but if you grew up with it, this is one that'll definitely be nostalgic. In terms of board games, I think Monopoly kind of defines that genre, so when looking at board games that made their way to the Super Nintendo, I think this would be an essential one to look at. And overall, this game is not bad, but this game is not fun to play against the computer, as I always feel like the computer is cheating. So if you're going to pick this one up, it's definitely fun to play with a second player, but not as fun to play single player. Super Battleship is okay, but I also want to note that I've only played the classic edition of Battleship on here. There's another version I actually haven't tried, so I can't give this game a full review, but other than that, it is the classic version of Battleship. Although I did find it strange that you mark 3 shots at a time, and then the computer gets 3 shots back at you. I think that's just to speed the game up a little, but I've never played it like that before this version. In terms of edutainment games, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was one I really loved playing on like the Macintosh and early Windows computers during this time. And this game performs very well on the Super Nintendo. This is actually a pretty solid port. If you've never heard of this title because you didn't grow up with the TV show back in the day, you play as a detective that is trying to figure out which one of Carmen Sandiego's henchmen has committed some sort of crime, and you have to know geography and some history to be able to find where this person is at. My playthrough ended abruptly because I actually got to where the criminal was, but I forgot to fill out the warrant, so whoops, he got away. Mario's Time Machine is just a neat little oddity. It's an edutainment title that I didn't grow up with back in the day, but I really do like history, and I found this game to be a little bit difficult even as an adult. Part of that is that I'm not really quite sure where to go, and I'm not motivated to figure it out more. But it's a Mario game on a Nintendo platform, and I feel like a lot of people would feel that this is an essential to have for their system, but you're not going to play it. It's just going to be a display piece. I have very similar thoughts about Mario is Missing, although I am a little bit more motivated to play this because there are a lot more platforming segments in this game, but I always have to consult a strategy guide to figure out where I'm supposed to go and what I'm supposed to do. If I was a kid back in the day, I probably would have spent hours in this game just trying to figure it out, but as I've said before, adult now with adult problems. This can't be one of them. So, based on what I've said so far before about games that are meant for children that I'm playing as an adult, what do you think my opinion is of Mario's early years preschool fun? It's actually more impressive to me than I was originally thinking when I popped in the cartridge, because there are a lot of voice samples on this cartridge. Which, yes, if you're going to talk to preschoolers, you definitely have to have a voice associated with it, and somehow they were able to get all these voice samples on a cartridge. That's actually the only thing I found impressive about this title as an adult. But if you have young kids, I'm not quite sure if the educational content is still up to date enough for your average preschooler in modern days.
You chose pig. The pig is wet.
And the games I have saved for last are these toy simulation games. Most of these games play very similarly, in which you are going to play as some sort of military commander, and you're going to command your troops, organize where they go, build up resources, and then take down your enemy. And all in all, these games are well designed, however, they're not ones that I feel like will have a mass appeal. Even for someone like me, who would liken these games to something like Age of Empires that came out on PC in the mid-90s, these aren't necessarily ones that I'd like to come back to. And part of that is due to the fact that you have to know a lot about the game's controls, as well as what their menu icons mean. I actually had to look up the game manual so I'd know exactly what I was doing in each game, but eventually gave up and just let the computer play itself. I really don't think any of these are bad games, but I definitely think these are the ones that are going to be the least popular out of this category, because this game is mostly strategy and less about the actual battles. Some of these games, like Liberty or Death, is actually based on real events. Another one in this list, Operation Europe Path to Victory, is actually a World War II simulator, but then you also have Romance of the Three Kingdoms, where you are going to be working your way through different periods of history in realistic settings with fictional stories. All in all, my review of most of these games is that it really does need mouse support for these types of games, especially when you're going to be moving a cursor over the map a lot more, and then selecting options in a menu. And some of these games actually got mouse support, but some of them did not as well. So for me personally, I don't recommend a single one of these games for anybody, except for hardcore battle simulation strategy games of this time period. And with that said, that wraps up this part of the Ultimate Super Nintendo review where we looked at games. In the next part, we're going to wrap up the Super Nintendo review. We will take a look at the system's legacy after it was replaced by the Nintendo 64. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.